The marble lobby of Nexovate's towering headquarters in New Avalon gleamed like a frozen sea, catching the chandelier's golden light in waves of opulence. But the air was thick with something sharper, cologne-soaked ambition, the clink of wine glasses, and the venom of mockery. Khalid Mansour, a billionaire draped in tailored silk, leaned on his ebony cane, his voice slicing through the hum of the gala like a shard of glass. "If he's going to mop this marble," he sneered in smooth Arabic, "someone ought to teach him not to walk like he owns the place." Laughter erupted, sharp and indulgent, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, a chorus of tailored suits and diamond cufflinks reveling in their superiority. Lucas Varn, the man at the center of their scorn, didn't flinch. His calloused hands twisted the mop with the quiet precision of a craftsman, the soft squeak of water on stone his only reply. The navy jumpsuit clung to him, frayed at the cuffs, faded at the seams, a garment worn not as shame, but as a badge of honest labor. To Lucas, it was a name he carried with pride, even when the world spat it with disdain. Behind him, investors milled outside the gala room, their drinks raised in toast to power and profit, their eyes glinting with the thrill of dominance. Khalid's laugh rang again, a king mocking a peasant. "Do you understand me?" he taunted in Arabic, his accent clipped, his tone dripping with condescension. "Or shall I speak slower for the help?" The room chuckled, a cruel harmony. Lucas dipped the mop into the bucket, water swirling like a silent storm. For a fleeting moment, the chandelier's glow caught the faint ink of a tattoo beneath his rolled sleeve. A sigil, weathered and nearly invisible, known only to those who'd pored over ancient texts or walked through war's ashes. He straightened, turned, and in flawless Arabic, his voice low yet resonant, said, "The floor may mirror your wealth, sir, but your words alone unveil your worth." The silence that followed was a thunderclap. Khalid's smirk crumbled, his wineglass frozen midair. A woman's soft gasp punctured the stillness, followed by a stifled cough from the back. Lucas offered no smirk, no triumph, just a single respectful nod before returning to his work, the mop moving like a poet's pen across the marble. From the mezzanine above, Clara Voss watched, her breath catching in her throat. The CEO of Nexovate, poised in a tailored black suit that shimmered like polished obsidian, had paused mid-stride, her meticulously planned evening, greeting delegates, delivering the keynote, sealing the expansion deal, suddenly irrelevant. There was something in Lucas's movements, steady and unyielding, like a lighthouse weathering a gale. And now this, a janitor answering a billionaire's cruelty not with rage, but with a grace carved from ancient stone. She sipped her water, its taste suddenly foreign, as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. Below, Lucas wheeled his cart toward the service hallway, his hands steady but his heart heavy with its familiar ache. Eli was waiting. In the dim maintenance room, tucked behind shelves of bleach and dusty lockers, a worn chair cradled a small table. On it lay a math workbook, 2 crayons, and a half-eaten granola bar, relics of a boy's quiet resilience. "Hey, buddy," Lucas whispered, crouching beside his son. "Sorry I took so long." Eli's eyes, bright despite the weight of sleep, met his father's. "It's okay. I was drawing spaceships. This one's got solar sails." Lucas's smile warmed the dim room. "Can I hitch a ride someday?" "Only if you bring snacks," Eli grinned, his voice soft but certain. "And not the carrot ones." "Deal," Lucas said, ruffling his son's hair before settling on the concrete floor beside him, the world's noise fading into the rhythm of their shared silence. "You hungry?" Lucas asked, his voice a low anchor. Eli shook his head, leaning closer. "Dad, why did that man yell at you?" Lucas's breath caught. He could have woven a lie, called it a jest. But Eli was already learning the world's sharp edges. Tonight was for truth. "He thought he was better than me," Lucas said softly. "Because of my clothes, my job." Eli tilted his head, his eyes searching. "But you spoke his language." "Yeah," Lucas nodded, a faint chuckle escaping. "And why'd he look scared after?" The question hung like a lantern in the dark. "Because," Lucas said, his voice steady as stone, Some people fear being wrong, but most fear being seen for who they are. In the gala room, Khalid sat rigid, his wine forgotten, his laughter silenced. The air had shifted, conversations hushed, as if the room itself held its breath. All eyes turned to Clara as she stepped onto the small stage, her presence commanding yet softened by something new. "Before we begin," she said, her voice clear yet carrying an unfamiliar warmth, "I want to acknowledge something rare." She paused, letting the silence stretch like a taut string. Dignity doesn't always walk through the front door. Sometimes it arrives with a mop and a steady heart. A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning. Clara's gaze flicked to Khalid, who looked away, his cane suddenly a prop rather than a scepter. Hours later, the gala long over, Lucas returned to the lobby, the marble glowing under the soft lights like a moonlit lake. He moved with the rhythm of a man who knew his work better than his own heartbeat, each swipe of the mop a quiet defiance. He needed no applause, no vindication, just the certainty that Eli was safe, fed, and proud. The click of heels broke the silence. Lucas turned to find Clara standing a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression unreadable yet piercing. "You speak Arabic," she said, her tone a mix of curiosity and challenge. Lucas nodded. "And Latin? Farsi? A bit of Greek? Enough to navigate a library or a battlefield." Her eyebrow arched, a flicker of surprise. "That's not in your HR file." "Didn't think it mattered for waxing floors," he replied, his voice even but laced with quiet conviction. A beat of silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Then Clara asked, her voice softer, "Why are you really here, Lucas Varn?" He met her gaze, seeing past the CEO to the woman whose eyes held a fracture mended with care. "Because my son deserves to know," he said, "that even when the world calls you small, you can stand tall, speak truth, and leave with your dignity intact." Huh, Clara stared, and for the first time that night, a real smile broke across her face. Not the polished grin of boardrooms, but one that whispered of hope, of stories yet unwritten. By dawn, a grainy 30-second video had swept the internet, amassing 5 million views. Filmed from behind a velvet curtain by a catering assistant with a keen sense of justice, it captured everything. Khalid's venomous insult, the stunned silence, and Lucas Varn, mop in hand, delivering a reply that landed like a quiet thunderbolt. Headlines blazed across screens. Janitor silences billionaire with one line. Dignity on marble floors. Who is Lucas Varn? Inside Nexavate's glass tower, whispers outpaced the elevators. Lucas walked the familiar halls, his steps as steady as ever, but today the air felt different. The stares weren't mocking or dismissive. They were curious, tinged with unease, as if the marble itself had begun to listen to his quiet tread. In the executive wing, Clara's office remained sealed, blinds drawn, her silence fueling speculation. At 9:43 a.m., a message pinged on Lucas's phone, a device he rarely checked. 48th floor, office 312, no escort needed, CV. He stared at the screen, then peeled off his gloves, washed his hands, and straightened his jumpsuit's collar. He didn't change. He didn't need to. The elevator ride was a quiet ascent through floors of glass and ambition, each ding a memory he'd buried long ago. The doors opened to a minimalist office, all clean lines and city views, where Clara stood by the window, her silhouette framed by New Avalon's skyline. She didn't turn. "How does it feel," she asked, "to have the world see you for something you never sought?" Lucas closed the door softly. "Like stepping into a room that was always there, only now the lights are on." She turned, her eyes weary but razor sharp. "You're not just a janitor." He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No one ever is." Clara crossed to a tablet on the side table, pressing play. The video flickered to life. The insult, the reply, the silence. She paused it as Lucas turned back to his mop, his dignity a quiet flame. "That," she said, her voice low, "was the most disciplined act of strength I've ever seen." "It wasn't about strength," Lucas countered softly. "It was about Eli." Her breath caught at the name. "My son," he said, stepping closer. "He was there, in the back room, Hearing it all, Clara blinked, her composure wavering. And you still chose calm? Lucas met her gaze, unflinching. He doesn't need a father who fights. He needs one who endures without turning bitter. The silence that followed was sacred, a shared breath between two souls who'd known loss. Clara exhaled, her voice tightening. They want to fire you. Lucas didn't blink. Of course they do. I won't let them, she said, her tone fierce. You might not have a choice, he replied, gentle but firm. You built this place to save something, Clara. Have you forgotten what it was? Her eyes widened, not with anger, but with recognition, as if he'd held up a mirror to her soul. Meanwhile, in the employee break room, a huddle of workers clustered around a phone, the video looping. That's the guy who mops the West Wing, right? One asked. Yeah, another nodded, with the kid who sketches comics in the closet. A maintenance supervisor sipped his coffee, his voice gruff but warm. People like him come in quiet, but they leave echoes that shake the walls. That afternoon, Eli sat on a folding chair in the maintenance wing, a dusty tablet playing cartoons as he sketched in his notepad. The page showed a man in a jumpsuit, mop raised like a blade against a towering wave of suits and ties. In crooked letters, a caption read, "True Power Whispers." Lucas knelt beside him, his heart swelling at the sight. Nice work, buddy, he said softly. Eli looked up, his eyes bright with trust. Dad, are you a superhero? Lucas chuckled, brushing a crumb from his son's jacket. Just a guy trying to keep the floor clean for you to walk on. In the sterile chill of Nexavate's boardroom, tension hung like a storm cloud, heavy and unspoken. Gavin Strath, the COO with a smile as polished as his cufflinks, leaned forward, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. This isn't about politics, he said, his eyes glinting with calculated charm. It's about optics. Our shareholders are watching this unfold like a circus. We can't let a janitor become the face of Nexavate overnight. Clara Voss, seated at the head of the obsidian table, didn't flinch. Her gaze, steady as a glacier, met his. Maybe, she said, her voice low and unyielding, he's the only one in this room whose face belongs on it. A ripple of discomfort stirred among the board members, their tailored suits shifting uneasily against leather chairs. Gavin pressed harder, his tone tightening. He made your guest look like a fool in 3 languages. You think that plays well in Riyadh? Clara's jaw clenched, but her reply was swift, cutting through his words like a scalpel. He didn't insult anyone. He answered with dignity. Gavin leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. And what happens when they dig deeper? A man with his education doesn't just wake up one day and choose to scrub toilets. There's a story there, Clara, and stories rot when left in the shadows. Her eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance igniting within her. Then maybe, she said, her voice rising like a tide, it's time we told it ourselves. That night, in the dim glow of the janitor's closet, Lucas Varn sat on the cold floor, his back pressed against the wall, the hum of pipes a quiet lullaby. Eli slept in the old cushioned chair, his small frame curled around his backpack, his breath soft and steady. Lucas draped a worn blanket over his son, his calloused fingers lingering on the fabric, as if anchoring himself to this moment of peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, more whispers, more battles, but tonight he had kept his vow. He had stood tall without shouting, unbroken, unhidden, his dignity a quiet flame that refused to flicker. High above in her glass and concrete office, Clara Voss sat alone, the city's skyline a mosaic of light beyond her window. She replayed a security clip, not the viral video that had set the world ablaze, but a grainy, silent moment from earlier that day. Lucas crouched beside Eli, brushing crumbs from his son's jacket, whispering words she couldn't hear before pulling him into a hug that spoke of love, stronger than steel. She watched it twice, her throat tightening, then switched off the screen. In the darkness, she murmured to the empty room, "He's not the story the world craves, but he's the one it needs." Some truths are so heavy, they bend time itself. At dawn, Lucas sat on a faded city bus rumbling toward the edge of New Avalon, his gloved hands resting on his knees, steady as ever. The sunrise hadn't yet pierced the gray, but he didn't need light to trace the scars of his past. In his satchel, an unopened folder from Clara weighed like a stone, her parting words echoing, "You deserve to know what they tried to bury." But Lucas wasn't sure he could face the ghosts of a life that had cost him everything. Beside him, Eli slept, his head nestled against his father's arm, still in pajamas beneath an oversized hoodie. They were headed to a weekend shift, early enough that the world felt hushed, though Lucas had been carrying silence far longer. The old university campus hadn't changed. Ivy strangling stone walls, creaking benches etched with memorial plaques, the coffee shop where he once graded papers over lukewarm lattes. Beyond the South Library loomed the lecture hall where his world had unraveled. He didn't take Eli inside. Instead, they sat on the steps, sharing a bag of warm breakfast rolls, the steam curling in the cool morning air. "Is this where you worked?" Eli asked, crumbs dusting his chin. Lucas nodded, his eyes distant. "A long time ago." "What did you do?" Eli pressed, his voice bright with curiosity. Lucas paused, the weight of memory settling in his chest. "I asked hard questions," he said, "and taught people how to live inside the answers." Eli frowned, thoughtful. "That sounds like a superpower." Lucas chuckled, a soft sound that warmed the air. It felt like one, until someone decided it was too dangerous. 8 years ago, in a packed lecture hall, Lucas had stood before a sea of students, chalk in hand, his voice alive with fire. "Language," he declared, underlining the word with a bold stroke, "is more than words. It's how we reveal what we believe, how we carry our wounds, and how we heal them." Applause had thundered, but so had envy. The accusation came like a guillotine. A journal article, his proudest work, flagged for a minor citation error. A fixable mistake. But whispers turned to verdicts. Funding vanished, his tenure vote stalled, then denied. Unseen by most, Gavin Strath, then a ruthless trustee, had sat on the review board, orchestrating Lucas's fall not for justice, but for leverage. Back in the present, Lucas unfolded the letter Clara had tucked into the folder. The original tenure recommendation, signed by 3 of 4 trustees, lay stark against an internal memo from Gavin. Delay the vote pending review. Potential leverage over emerging research if funding is disrupted. Lucas closed the folder, his breath slow and heavy. It had been real, not a failure, but a betrayal, engineered to silence him. That evening, by the freight elevator, Clara waited, her silhouette softened in the dim light. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk," she said quietly. Lucas leaned against the wall, his voice low. "I wasn't sure I'd want to feel." She hesitated, her eyes searching his. "What they did was calculated. You could go public now. They'd believe you." Lucas shook his head, his gaze steady but weary. "It's not about what they'd believe. It's about what I'd become." Clara's brow furrowed. "You think silence keeps you safe?" "No," he said softly, "but it keeps me kind. Without that, everything I've built with Eli crumbles." Her breath caught, his words striking a chord she hadn't expected. "Kindness survives in silence?" she asked, almost pleading. Lucas met her eyes, unflinching. "It has to, or I've failed him." She didn't look away, her own battles mirrored in his gaze. "What if your silence costs more now? What if it's not just your story anymore?" Lucas exhaled, the weight of her words settling deep. "I used to think truth was the sharpest weapon," he murmured. "But timing, it's the finer blade." Clara swallowed hard, her voice softening. "And what does your timing say now?" He looked at her, not as a CEO, but as a woman who'd fought her own wars behind closed doors. "Maybe," he said, "it's time to stop whispering." That night, after Eli had drifted to sleep, Lucas opened the second envelope. Inside was a faded photo, him, Clara, and a team of researchers beside a banner. Cognitive recovery through cross-linguistic therapy. Her hair was shorter then, his eyes less guarded. He hadn't known she'd been part of that grant. Beneath the photo, her handwriting read, "We were building something honest once. Maybe we still can." The next morning, Clara strode into the boardroom 5 minutes early, her presence a quiet storm. Gavin was already there, sipping espresso with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Rough press cycle, Clara? He taunted. She sat, ignoring him, her hands folded like a judge awaiting a verdict. You can't protect him forever, Gavin pressed, his voice low. The world will dig up who he really was. Clara leaned forward, her tone calm but lethal. Then maybe they'll also uncover who you are. His jaw tensed, but his smile held, a mask slipping, but not yet fallen. Downstairs, Lucas polished the elevator buttons, the brass gleaming like a mirror to a man he hadn't seen in years. A scholar, a father, a man with nothing left to hide. A young analyst, her lanyard still crisp, approached hesitantly. You're not just a janitor, are you? Lucas turned, his smile gentle. Depends on the day. She paused, then said, What you said about your son needing a father who endures, that wasn't just for him, was it? Lucas nodded, his voice soft but sure. No. It was for anyone who's ever been invisible in a room full of noise. That night, rain drummed against the janitor's break room windows, a metronome to memory. Lucas sat on the floor beside Eli, a thermos of soup warming their hands, an old quilt softening the concrete beneath them. Eli, curled in his oversized hoodie, gazed at the ceiling as if it held stars. You ever wish you had a different job? He asked, his voice small but piercing. Lucas paused, the question a key to a locked door. I used to teach, he said carefully, in a place with grand doors and grander egos. Did they like you? Eli asked. Lucas chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Some did. The ones who listened took what we learned with them. Eli flipped open his sketchbook, a new page waiting. Why'd you stop? Lucas exhaled, his gaze distant. Sometimes you build something with your whole heart, and someone else decides it's not theirs to honor. But I didn't stop teaching, Eli. I just changed the classroom. Eli's eyes held his father's for a long moment before he said, Then I'm your student now. Lucas's throat tightened, his voice barely a whisper. You've always been. The next morning, Lucas brought Eli to Nexavate's West Wing, the Saturday silence broken only by the hum of motion sensors and the click of auto-locking doors. Eli's backpack bulged with snacks, a paperback on Greek mythology, and his ever-present sketchbook. Clara, sleepless in her executive suite, caught sight of them on the security monitor, a ripple stirring beneath her polished calm. She stepped into the hall as they rounded the corner. Miss Clara! Eli's eyes lit up. She crouched to his level, her Louboutin heels absurd in the moment, but her smile genuine. Good morning, Professor Varn, she teased. Eli giggled. That's my dad. Runs in the family, she said, her gaze softening as it met Lucas's. I could give him a tour, she offered. Lucas tilted his head. The penthouse? No, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The place where ideas used to matter. 10 minutes later, they stood in the abandoned Level 6 lab, dust clinging to glass partitions like forgotten dreams. Unplugged smart whiteboards bore half-erased formulas, a child's stick figure scrawled in blue marker, a ghost of someone's fleeting joy. Eli's eyes widened. This looks like Iron Man's workshop. Lucas laughed, the sound warm in the sterile space. Except no one built the suit. Clara ran her fingers along a desk, her voice soft. This was your space, wasn't it? Lucas nodded. Ours. 4 researchers who believed language could heal, could rebuild the mind's broken maps. Her voice dropped, heavy with regret. Until the funding vanished. Until someone pulled the plug. Lucas said nothing, his silence louder than words. Eli wandered to a shelf of dusty books. Did you help people walk again? He asked. Lucas turned, his smile tender. No, but I helped them remember how to ask for water, say their child's name, or smile at a song they loved. Eli's voice fell to a whisper. That's even better. An hour later, they left the lab, the elevator's descent heavy with unspoken reverence. Clara broke the silence. Why didn't you tell me you worked on neurolinguistics recovery? Lucas shrugged, his voice steady. I figured you'd ask if you wanted to know. I didn't know where to start, she admitted, her eyes searching his. Start where it hurts, he said softly. She stopped, her gaze raw and unguarded. I'm tired of hurting alone, she whispered. That evening, Lucas and Eli walked home under a lavender-streaked sky, the city's pulse softening around them. They passed a street performer, his violin bow patched with duct tape, pouring his soul into a melody. Eli stopped, fishing a crumpled dollar from his pocket and dropping it into the open case. Lucas smiled. "You didn't have to do that, ooh." Eli shrugged, his voice small but sure. "He's playing like someone's listening." Lucas knelt, his hand on his son's shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "That's the kind of man I hope you become." Back in her office, Clara pulled a folder labeled Archive Varn 2016. Inside were Jonas's handwritten statements from a forgotten ethics hearing and a memo she'd never seen. From Gavin Strath, it outlined a plan to bury Lucas's work for corporate gain. Her breath caught, the truth a cold blade in her chest. He hadn't just been silenced, he'd been robbed. Clara Voss's breath caught in her throat, the memo in her hand a cold, sharp truth. The words, penned by Gavin Strath, laid bare a calculated theft. If we shift the grant attribution quietly, we can fold the methodology into Nexavate's portfolio without IP conflict. Varn's resistance makes him a liability. Lucas hadn't just been cast aside. He'd been plundered, his life's work stolen to fuel corporate greed. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the paper, her heart a storm of rage and guilt. She'd built Nexavat to protect the overlooked, yet she'd failed to see the betrayal that had broken a man like Lucas. The next morning, Clara stood outside the janitor's office, her usual armor of tailored suits replaced by jeans and a soft gray cardigan. She knocked, a sound as foreign to her as vulnerability. Lucas opened the door, his eyes widening at the sight of her, stripped of her corporate sheen. "I found something," she said, her voice low, holding out the memo. He read it in silence, his calloused hands steady but his jaw tightening. When he finished, he exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried years of buried pain. "I always suspected," he murmured, "but seeing it in black and white—" Clara nodded, her eyes searching his. "I don't know how to mend what they shattered." Lucas's gaze softened, kind but resolute. "Maybe it starts with not pretending it never happened." She stepped closer, her voice a whisper now, raw with sincerity. "Lucas, if I gave you one floor, one budget, no limits, what would you build?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes drifting to a distant place where dreams hadn't yet been crushed. Then a smile broke through, genuine and unguarded, as if surprised by its own freedom. "I'd build a room," he said, "where people remember who they are, even when the world tries to erase them." The words landed like a vow, heavy with hope, and Clara felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she'd built to survive. That night, Lucas tucked Eli into bed, the boy's eyes heavy with sleep, his small frame nestled beneath a patchwork quilt. "Dad," Eli mumbled, half in dreams, "that thing you said to Miss Clara about remembering who you are." Lucas ran a gentle hand through his son's hair, his heart swelling. "What about it?" Eli yawned, his voice soft but piercing. "Will I ever forget who I am?" Lucas leaned close, his whisper a lifeline in the dark. "Not as long as I'm here to remind you." Eli's lips curved into a sleepy smile, and Lucas lingered, watching his son drift into dreams, a quiet promise anchoring them both. The luxury dining room at Nexavate's quarterly investor dinner was a study in opulence, silverware gleaming like polished stars, laughter rehearsed to perfection, the air thick with judgment waiting to pounce. Lucas Varn stepped into that stillness, a mop in one hand, a squeaking bucket trailing behind. He wasn't meant to be here tonight, but 2 staff had called in sick, and Clara had personally requested a trusted replacement. So he entered the lion's den, not as a scholar or a voice of authority, but as the janitor, his navy jumpsuit a quiet rebellion against the room's grandeur. Across the polished floor, Gavin Strath adjusted his cufflinks, his gaze flicking to the service entrance with a predator's precision. "Look who's gracing us with his mop," he murmured to the socialite beside him, her pearls glinting like a noose. "That's the janitor from the video, isn't it?" she purred, sipping her wine. Gavin's smile was a blade. "The one and only. Fame burns fast. Let's see how long he lasts." Gavin stood, raising his glass with theatrical flair. To nexivate, he toasted, his voice dripping with mockery, and to knowing your place, even if it's wielding a mop by the power table. Polite laughter rippled through the room, a chorus of complicity. Lucas didn't flinch, rolling his bucket past the table, ignoring the chuckles and the flash of a phone camera, angled to catch him in an unflattering light. But Clara, seated at the head, saw everything. The way Gavin's eyes tracked Lucas, each jab a calculated strike, a test of power and dignity. She knew this was no accident. It was a battlefield drawn in whispers. Halfway through the entree, a media executive emboldened by wine hurled another barb. "Tell me, Varn," he called, his voice slurred with arrogance, "you teaching your boy to mop marble too? Or does he get a better deal?" A few guests snorted, one clapped, their amusement a sharp sting. Lucas turned slowly, setting his mop down with deliberate care, his eyes steady as stone. "I teach my son to clean up after others," he said, his voice low but resonant. "Whether that's floors or character depends on who's in the room." The words landed like a slow-burning ember, smoldering in the silence that followed. Clara's lips parted, her breath catching. She hadn't expected him to speak, but when he did, the room tilted, the air charged with something undeniable. As dessert was served, Clara rose, tapping her glass with a spoon, the chime cutting through the murmur. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice smooth as velvet but edged with steel. "Tonight was meant to celebrate progress, partnerships, the future." She paused, her gaze settling on Lucas, a quiet fire in her eyes. "But I've learned something greater. Integrity doesn't need a title, and sometimes the quietest man in the room has the loudest lessons to teach." Gavin's expression froze, his charm cracking like thin ice. The room wavered, caught between unease and curiosity. Clara continued, her voice unwavering. "Nexivate was built on innovation, but its strength lies in its people, the ones who hold it together when no one's watching." She raised her glass toward Lucas. "To those who endure, who show us what character looks like without a word." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was raw, real, and it left Gavin stranded in a silence he couldn't twist. In the service hall after dinner, Clara caught Lucas rinsing his mop, his sleeves rolled back, his movements steady as ever. "That was something," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised them both. He glanced over his shoulder, water dripping from his hands. "The toast or the humiliation before it?" "Both," she admitted. He wiped his hands on a cloth, his gaze steady. "You shouldn't have said that in front of them." "Why not?" she asked, stepping closer. "Because men like Gavin don't forgive when the spotlight shifts." Clara held his gaze, unflinching. "Good. Maybe he needs to stand in the dark for once." Lucas gave a low chuckle, a sound that warmed the sterile hall. "You want to start a war with the man running your profits?" "Maybe," she said, her voice fierce yet soft. "I'm ready to run this place on something stronger than fear." She paused, her eyes softening. "What you said about Eli, it stayed with me." Lucas shrugged, his voice quiet but sure. "The simplest truths hit the hardest." Clara looked down, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "You're not just here to mop floors." "No," he said gently, "but I'll keep doing it. It's honest work, and it keeps me close to what matters." Her gaze lifted, searching his. "And what matters to you, Lucas?" He hesitated, then answered with a raw honesty that cut through the air. "That my son never sees me become the kind of man I've spent my life shielding him from." The words struck Clara deeper than she expected, a crack in her carefully guarded heart. By morning, social media was ablaze, a grainy clip of Clara's toast spreading like wildfire. "The janitor who ended a room with one sentence. Who is Lucas Varn? More CEOs should be like Clara Voss." The comments poured in, a chorus of awe and admiration. In his corner office, Gavin hurled his phone across the desk, his growl echoing in the silence. "He's a liability," he muttered, the words a vow to himself. That night, in the quiet of their small apartment, Lucas read Eli a bedtime story. The boy curled beneath a patchwork quilt, his thumb tucked beneath his chin as sleep crept closer. Lucas closed the book, brushing hair from Eli's forehead. "Dad," Eli mumbled, "were they mean to you again?" Lucas paused, then answered honestly, "Some were." Did it hurt? Eli asked, his voice small but searching. Lucas smiled softly. A little, but the truth makes it worth it. Eli blinked, sleep pulling him under. Did you win? Lucas kissed his forehead, his voice a whisper. I didn't win, but I stayed true. That's better. On Monday, Lucas approached the mailbox with the wariness of a man accustomed to disappointment. Bills, ads, reminders of debts unpaid. But today the air felt too still, the building too quiet. When he opened box 2B, no overdue notice waited. Instead, a thick cream envelope gleamed, embossed with gold lettering. Nexavate Foundation Scholarship Division. His heart stilled. He tore it open, fingers trembling for the first time in years. The words inside rewrote his world. We are pleased to inform you that Eli Varn has been awarded a full academic scholarship to Starhaven Academy. Lucas blinked, reading it thrice, checking the date, the name. It was real, not a stunt, not pity, but a lifeline. Starhaven wasn't just a school, it was a crucible for future leaders, where Latin preceded algebra, where grilled salmon replaced mystery meat, and tuition dwarfed his earnings from 3 years combined. He sank onto the stairwell, the letter shaking in his hands, tears falling for the first time in months. Is it a good envelope or a bad one? Eli asked that night, swinging his feet from the kitchen chair. Lucas grinned, hiding the letter behind his back. Depends. How do you feel about uniforms and kids who might own horses? Eli's eyes widened. Real horses? Maybe even ponies, Lucas teased. Eli squinted. Do they let weird kids in? Lucas knelt, ruffling his hair. They do now. The next morning, Lucas stood outside Clara's office, the letter folded in his jacket pocket. He hesitated, but Mira Lorne, Clara's assistant, glanced up with a knowing smirk. She's inside, and no, you're not disturbing her. Lucas cleared his throat, sliding the letter across the counter. Did you have anything to do with this? Mira scanned the header, shaking her head. No, but I saw the finalist list. Eli earned it. Lucas frowned. The essay? The one about the broken music box, Mira said, smiling. It made 2 board members cry. He wrote, it wasn't the melody I loved. It was that Dad fixed it, even when he was tired. Lucas's breath caught, his heart swelling. Mira leaned in, her voice gentle. Your son didn't get this because of you. He got it because of who you've helped him become. That evening, as New Avalon faded into dusk, Clara found Lucas on the rooftop terrace, a sanctuary from the world's noise. You're not going to thank me again, are you? She teased, her voice light but warm. Lucas shook his head. Turns out it wasn't you. Just humbling. She raised a brow, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me you applied? He hesitated. I didn't want it to seem like charity, or worse, like I was using you. Clara folded her arms, studying him. Lucas, if you're using me, you're doing a terrible job. He laughed softly, then turned to her, his voice quiet. He wrote about the music box. It was my late wife's. It broke the night she died. I didn't fix it for months. I didn't think he noticed. Clara's voice softened, her eyes reflecting his grief. Kids see what we think they miss. That's where their strength comes from. The wind stirred, lifting a strand of her hair. Lucas brushed it back, their eyes locking for a moment too long, too real. Do you ever think, he murmured, that the things we hide are what make us worth seeing? Her voice was a whisper. Every day. The next morning, Lucas walked Eli to Starhaven Academy's gates, the boy's backpack dwarfing his small shoulders, his eyes alight with pride. Nervous? Lucas asked. Eli shrugged. A little, but you said brave people do things even when they're scared, right? Lucas knelt, smiling. Exactly. Eli threw his arms around his father's neck. Thanks for fixing the music box. Lucas held him tight, his voice thick. Thank you for hearing it. As Eli vanished through the gates, Lucas stood watching, his thoughts drifting to his wife, to second chances, to the way a single envelope could unlock the grandest doors. In her office, Clara watched the scene through the security feed, her expression still, her heart whispering, one right choice at a time, and maybe we all find where we belong. Clara Voss's penthouse was a sanctuary of sleek lines and quiet opulence, but its vastness felt hollow, a home too large for one soul. Barefoot in her modern kitchen, she stared at a half-prepared salad, its greens wilting under her distracted gaze. The new Avalon skyline glittered beyond the tall windows, gold and silver lights pulsing like a distant heartbeat. But inside, time stood still. A knock at the door broke her reverie, a sound she hadn't known she was waiting for. When she opened it, Lucas Varn stood there, his dark button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, his presence unadorned yet steady as stone. Beside him, Eli clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, their petals slightly wilted from the park's morning dew. "We weren't sure if we needed a tie," Lucas said softly, his voice carrying a quiet warmth. Clara's lips curved into a rare, unguarded smile. "You're perfect. Come in." Eli's eyes widened at the vaulted ceilings, the open space shimmering with subtle elegance. But Lucas's gaze never wavered. It rested on Clara, respectful, unwavering, a lighthouse in the storm of her world. Dinner began quietly, the scent of roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon filling the air, a dish Clara hadn't cooked in years. Setting 3 places at a table, built for one, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd forgotten. Eli, between bites, peppered her with questions, his voice bright with curiosity. "Have you always lived here? Is that art real? Do all CEOs have elevators in their houses?" Clara laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that startled her with its lightness. The first in weeks. "Not all of them," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Just the lonely ones who work too much." Eli tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "You don't seem lonely tonight." Her hand paused over her wine glass, her heart catching at the boy's quiet wisdom. Lucas watched her, his silence a gentle anchor. After Eli finished his apple pie and drifted to sleep on the couch, wrapped in one of Clara's oversized throws, the room settled into a softer silence, warm and reverent. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, their steam curling like whispered secrets, and joined Lucas by the window, the city's pulse a quiet hum below. "She would have loved this," Lucas said, nodding toward Eli, his voice thick with memory. "She always wanted him to see a life full of possibility." Clara watched his reflection in the glass, his features softened by the city's glow. "Was she like you?" she asked. Lucas didn't hesitate. "Smarter, more hopeful. I taught languages. She taught me to forgive people I hadn't even met." The words hung between them, not heavy but full, a bridge of unspoken understanding. "I read your thesis," Clara said finally, her voice low, almost confessional. Lucas's brow lifted, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "It wasn't just academic," she continued. "It was human. You tied language to dignity, to giving people their voices back. I'm starting to see why they tried to silence yours." "Suck a tea." Lucas sipped his coffee, his gaze drifting to the city below, its lights breathing like a living thing. "Why didn't you fight back?" she asked, her voice softening. No longer a CEO, but a woman reaching for the man she respected. He met her eyes, his own carrying the weight of years. God, I wanted to scream the truth from every rooftop. But I looked at Eli, and I knew if I fought dirty even to win, he'd grow up thinking that was the way. I'd rather he learns to live with peace in his heart than vengeance in his blood. Clara blinked fast, her throat tightening. "My mother," she said, her voice trembling, "was a house cleaner. She scrubbed marble floors like the ones in Nexavate's lobby. One night, she collapsed in the building she cleaned. No one called for help for an hour because she wore a janitor's uniform, because they thought she didn't matter." Lucas inhaled deeply, his face softening with a quiet understanding that needed no words. "I built Nexavate to ensure no one like her was ever invisible again," Clara continued, her voice steadying but raw. "But I forgot something your son reminded me of in that lobby." Lucas's eyes held hers, gentle but searching. "What's that?" "That power doesn't always protect the good. It can hide the corrupt." She turned to him fully, her eyes glassy but her voice clear as a bell. "I see you, Lucas Varn. I see what they tried to erase. And I swear if I have to burn down the boardroom to restore what they stole, I will." Lucas didn't speak. He reached across, his calloused hand brushing hers, gentle yet sure, a touch that spoke louder than words. "You don't have to burn anything," he said softly. "Just promise to see the janitor before the title." Her voice cracked, a single tear escaping. "I already do." They stood there, hands barely touching, hearts drawing closer than words could measure. Outside, New Avalon pulsed. But within Clara's home, something had shifted. A reckoning, not of vengeance, but of restoration, and perhaps the first whispers of love. The janitor's closet was quieter than usual, the hum of pipes a faint echo of the world outside. Lucas sat alone on a wooden bench, elbows on his knees, staring at his weathered palms. Hands that once crafted lectures on ancient dialects now scrubbed coffee stains from conference rooms. He didn't regret the work. Honest labor never shamed him. But tonight, a tension hung in the air, a familiar tightening, like the moment before a trap springs shut. A knock broke the silence. Mira Lorne, Clara's longtime assistant, peered in, her usual sharp tone softened. "Mr. Varn, Miss Voss is in the executive lounge. She'd like you to come up." Lucas stood slowly, his heart heavy but steady. Of course. As he walked Nexovate's glass corridors, the air felt off. Too many glances, doors closing, a heartbeat too late. The executive lounge was a sleek expanse of marble and muted light, but Clara wasn't there. Instead, Gavin Strath leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled up, a drink in hand, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Quite the climb, Professor," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "From janitor to dinner guest to whatever Clara's shaping you into. Impressive." Lucas didn't blink. "If you called me here to measure power, I'm not the one needing a ruler." Gavin's smile flickered, then hardened. He tossed a paper onto the glass table. "Recognize this?" Lucas picked it up, a printed email bearing his name as the sender. The words were venomous, cruel accusations against Clara, attacking her leadership, her integrity. A character assassination disguised as a message. "I didn't write this," Lucas said, his voice calm but firm, holding the paper like it carried a stench. Gavin sipped his drink, his eyes glinting. "Shame. It's already reached the board. Investors get twitchy when a CEO's judgment is questioned." Lucas met his gaze unflinching. "You're afraid of what she's becoming, of who she sees through now." Gavin stepped closer, his voice low and cold. "I'm afraid of sentiment over structure, charity over merit. You may have fooled her with your tragic scholar act, but I know you. A scandal with a mop." Lucas's eyes burned with quiet fire. "I'd rather be a scandal with integrity than a suit without a soul." Gavin's jaw tensed, the air crackling between them. Clara entered, her presence a sudden storm. She froze, taking in the scene. Lucas, the email in his hand. Gavin's calculated calm. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice clipped, sharp as glass. Gavin moved first. "I had to bring this to you, Clara. This email was sent to the board anonymously, but I traced it to Varn's account." Lucas turned to her, his voice steady. "It's a fake." Gavin's smile was smooth as oil, exactly what a guilty man would say. Clara's eyes searched Lucas's, and for the first time in days, a shadow of doubt flickered. Not deep, but enough to sting. "Leave us," she told Gavin, her tone quiet but unyielding. He hesitated, then left, his shadow lingering like a stain. Alone, Clara faced Lucas, the silence heavy. "Is there any chance?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "None," Lucas said firmly. "I'd never write that. Not about you. Not about anyone." "I want to believe you," she said. But her silence spoke louder, bound by the rules of a CEO's world, where trust was a luxury she couldn't always afford. "The board meets tomorrow," she said. "They want you gone." Lucas nodded, unsurprised. "Of course they do. I'm fighting it," she insisted, her voice fierce. "Don't," he said gently. "If you push back, they'll come for you too. Nexavat needs someone who believes in tomorrow." Clara stepped closer, her eyes burning. "And what about you?" Lucas gave a tired smile, soft but resolute. "I believe in something smaller, quieter, raising a boy who sees the world through hope, not revenge." Her voice cracked. "You don't deserve this." He reached for the door, his voice steady as stone. I've learned that when the world knocks you down for standing tall, you don't kneel. You walk away taller. Clara's fingers grazed his arm, trembling. Lucas, wait. He paused, meeting her gaze. What do I tell them? She asked, searching for words. Tell them the janitor left quietly, he said. Not because he was guilty, but because he was proud. As he stepped out, Clara stood alone, the room's silence suffocating. In the maintenance wing, Eli waited on the same bench, his legs swinging nervously. Seeing his father, he leapt up. Are we going home? Lucas knelt, zipping Eli's backpack, his hands steady despite the ache in his chest. Yeah, buddy. Eli glanced behind him. Did you get fired? Lucas met his son's eyes, his voice calm but warm. Not fired. Released, like a kite when the string breaks and the sky opens wide. Eli frowned, confused but trusting, and took his father's hand. As they descended the back stairs, away from the spotlight and schemes, Clara watched from her office window, her heart heavy. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw Eli's small hand in Lucas's calloused one, a bond unbroken by the world's cruelty. Lucas never looked back, but Clara didn't look away, not once. In the boardroom, the chairman's voice rang like cold steel. Let the records show this emergency session addresses an integrity breach tied to a memo attributed to Mr. Lucas Varn. Lucas stood at the far end of the obsidian table. No uniform today, just a dark jacket, his hands folded calmly, his dignity a quiet armor. Across the table, Clara sat, her professional mask hiding the fire in her chest. She hadn't slept, haunted by Lucas's departure the night before. Yet here he was, returning not to beg but to bear witness. Mr. Varn, the chairman said, adjusting his spectacles, we offered you a written resignation. You chose this hearing. Why? Lucas looked up, his voice steady, carrying the weight of truth worn heavy by time. Because it's not just my name at stake, it's hers. All eyes turned to Clara, her expression flickering like a candle in a storm. You may think I'm replaceable, Lucas continued, and you're right. But if you let this lie drag her down with me, you'll lose more than a janitor. You'll lose the last honest piece of Nexavat. A murmur rippled through the boardroom, the air taut with the weight of Lucas Varn's words. That vulnerability didn't write the message, he said, his voice steady as a river carving stone. A person did, someone with access, someone who wanted Clara gone and saw me as a pawn to discard. An executive, his face sharp with skepticism, leaned forward. Are you accusing a board member? Lucas's gaze was unflinching, his tone even but piercing. No. I'm accusing someone too spineless to speak truth in the open. Gavin Strath chuckled, a sound like breaking glass, his confidence a thin veneer. So you admit carelessness, but expect us to ignore the fallout? No, Lucas countered, his voice firm yet calm. I expect you to dig deeper than what's convenient. Ask yourself, why would I, a janitor, target a CEO who showed my son and me nothing but kindness? Why would I betray the one person who saw me as more than a mop? His eyes found Clara, her professional mask cracking under the weight of his words. She gave me dignity. I won't let you turn that into a weapon. Silence fell, heavy and sacred, as if the room itself held its breath. A board member, her snow-white hair framing steely eyes, broke the quiet. Mr. Varn, you said she saw you. What did she see? Lucas paused, his heart a quiet drumbeat. She saw a man who lost everything, title, career, self-worth, but kept going, kept teaching his son right from wrong, kept showing up. His gaze swept the room, unflinching. That's more than I can say for some of the credentials here. His words carried no venom, only truth, sharp and clean as a blade. And what did you see in her? The woman pressed. Lucas's lips curved into a soft smile, his voice warm with reverence. Someone who carries a company's weight on her shoulders, yet found time to ask about a boy's science project. Someone who made room at her table for me, not out of duty, but desire. Clara looked down, her chest tightening, his words striking chords deeper than bone. I don't want my job back, Lucas continued, his voice rising with quiet resolve. This isn't about me, but I won't let my silence be the stone you hurl at her. Another pause, the room suspended in his truth. Then from the shadows, a new voice cut through. I can verify Mr. Varn's claim. Heads turned as Mira Lorne stepped forward, her usual clipboard absent, her gaze razor-sharp. I overheard Gavin Strath instruct an IT technician to access Lucas's terminal 2 nights ago. He thought I'd left. Her words were crisp, unyielding. I'm prepared to testify under oath. The room erupted in whispers, a storm of shock and suspicion. Gavin shot to his feet, his face pale as ash. That's absurd. It's true, Mira cut in, her voice ablade. The chairman's gavel slammed down. Enough! He turned to Gavin, whose composure had crumbled. We'll investigate your conduct immediately. Vacate your position, pending inquiry. Gavin stormed out, his threats trailing like smoke. No one stopped him. The chairman turned to Lucas. You may step down. But Lucas lingered, his presence a quiet force. One last thing, he said, turning to Clara. For every tower like this, there are thousands like me, sweeping, fixing, holding it up, invisible until something breaks. He exhaled, his voice soft but resonant. I'm just one voice, but if mine made you look down the hall, see who keeps this place standing, then I'll call this a good day. He nodded to the board, shoulders straight, eyes calm, and walked out. No applause followed, but Clara stood, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. I'm reinstating him. The board stirred. He said he doesn't want the job, someone noted. Clara's gaze lingered on the door he'd exited. Then we offer him more than a job, something worthy of honest hands. The room fell silent, reverent, as if the truth had carved a new foundation. Clara stood at the head of the obsidian table, the screen's glow casting soft shadows on the faces of the board. They'd watched the footage endlessly. Lucas, unmoved by mockery, his silence louder than rage. Eli's voice small but unshaken, narrating his father's unyielding dignity. Clara closed her laptop, her voice steady but brimming with conviction. What we saw wasn't a scandal, it was a mirror. No one spoke, the weight of her words sinking deep. She glanced at Gavin's empty chair, his absence a verdict already written. It's not enough to fire one man and move on, she said. We allowed this. We built systems that prized charm over character, noise over integrity. Lucas Varn didn't lose his title because he failed. We failed him. An older board member cleared his throat. Ms. Voss, what do you propose? Her voice was resolute, a beacon in the storm. We restore more than his name. We let his legacy live here, not in shadows. 2 weeks later, Lucas stood before the frosted glass doors of a newly renovated wing at Nexavat. The words, the haven of voices, stenciled in brushed silver above. Below, in clean serif letters, founded by Dr. Lucas Varn. He blinked once, then twice, the weight of his name, his truth etched in permanence. Eli at his side tugged his sleeve, his eyes bright. Dad, that's your name. Lucas looked to Clara, who stood a few paces away, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, her CEO armor shed. She was just a woman now, proud of something built with honest hands. I told them to keep the title, she said softly, catching his gaze. It's yours. It always was. Lucas exhaled, his breath a release of years held tight. I'm not sure I remember how to be that man. Clara stepped closer, her voice warm. You don't need to be him. Just be the man who raised a boy brave enough to speak truth to the world. A smile broke across his face, soft and unguarded. Inside, the haven of voices glowed with warmth, natural wood floors, bookshelves brimming with stories, interactive whiteboards humming with possibility. Desks formed a circle, more community than classroom. But it was the people who tightened Lucas's chest. Custodians, security guards, cafeteria workers, delivery drivers, assistants, all there not for degrees, but to reclaim their voices, to speak with confidence, unapologetic and true. Lucas turned to Clara. You did this? She shook her head, her smile quiet but sure. We did this. You gave me the language. I built the room. That afternoon, Lucas stood before the class, marker in hand, his heart a steady drum. He hesitated, gazing at the faces before him, some in uniforms, some in hoodies, all alight with hope. He wrote one word on the board: voice. "What is this?" he asked. A woman in her 50s, her eyes sharp but hands trembling, answered, "A noun, something you have or lose." Lucas nodded, his voice warm. "Yes, but it's also something you build and sometimes give." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm Lucas Varn. You may know me as a janitor or from the stories online. But I'm simpler than that, a man who once forgot how to speak for himself. Now I teach language not for power, but for dignity. In this room, we speak not just to be heard, but to remember we matter." Eli in the back grinned, his notebook bursting with drawings, and raised his hand. "Dad, can I answer first?" Lucas laughed, the sound filling the room like sunlight. "You always do." Eli stood, clutching a rehearsed sheet, his voice small but certain. "Voice isn't just what you say, it's what you do when no one answers back." Silence fell, then applause rose, soft at first, swelling into a wave of belief finally set free. As the sun dipped below New Avalon's skyline, Clara lingered by the door, watching Lucas and Eli clean the whiteboards together, their laughter a quiet melody. "This was never about redemption," she said softly. Lucas raised a brow. "No." She shook her head, her eyes warm. "It was about restoration. You didn't need fixing, Lucas. You needed to be seen. So did everyone who walked these halls in silence." He leaned on the marker tray, arms crossed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Funny how the smallest voices carry the most weight." Clara held his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay." Lucas blinked, caught off guard. "In the program?" "No," she said, her words trembling with vulnerability. "In my life." He glanced at Eli, now laughing with two custodians over spilled markers, then back at Clara. "Only if we walk it with honest hands," he said softly. Her smile was real, unguarded, and for the first time neither stood alone. Golden light flooded Nexavate's atrium, where a banner proclaimed, "The Haven of Voices, Grand Opening." The scent of fresh coffee mingled with lavender, the air alive with quiet conversation. This wasn't just an event, it was sacred, a new beginning. Lucas adjusted his sky-blue collared shirt, chosen by Clara, its crispness a quiet armor. He straightened Eli's collar next, his calloused hand gentle. "You good?" he asked, his voice low. Eli grinned, clutching a folded paper. "Better than good." Clara approached, her ivory blouse and jeans a departure from her usual power suits, her hair loose, her smile free. "You clean up well," she teased. Lucas chuckled. "Don't get used to it. My mop's a jealous friend." Eli smirked, a child's knowing glance passing between them. Soft music ushered in the event, employees and families filling the space, skeptics turned supporters. A wooden podium stood on stage, a microphone waiting, a projection declaring the mission, to give voice to the unheard, to heal through language. Clara took the stage, her words steady yet brimming with emotion. "We build hospitals for bodies, labs for science. Today we open a space for the soul. The Haven of Voices isn't a program, it's a promise. Your voice matters, no matter your title." Her eyes found Lucas and Eli in the front row. "The man who taught us this, who reminded us who we are, once scrubbed these floors. His name is Lucas Varn, a teacher who never stopped teaching, even when we stopped seeing him." Applause thundered, a tide of gratitude. Lucas stepped onto the stage, each step a reclaiming of a life rewritten. He adjusted the microphone, his voice steady, but rich with feeling. "Let me tell you a story," he began, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "There was a man who lost everything he thought defined him: title, research, place in the world. He picked up a mop, not because he forgot who he was, but to show his son what dignity looks like." The room hushed, hanging on his words. "I learned it's not the title before your name that tells your truth. It's how you walk when no one watches, when laughter stings, when doors slam, when you clean another's mess and still choose to smile." He glanced at Eli, his voice catching. "That man found home not in walls or awards, but in a boy who believed in him more than the world ever did. He stepped back, his voice breaking softly. Thank you for letting me find my way back. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, but what followed stilled them. Eli stepped forward, clutching his paper, Clara handing him the microphone with a gentle smile. I'm Eli Varn, he said, his voice small but sure. I'm 8, and I wrote this for my dad. Lucas froze, a hand on his chest. Clara's touch on his shoulder was a quiet anchor. Eli cleared his throat, his words ringing clear. I don't know how many letters come after Dad's name. I know what comes before. Honest, brave, kind. Some have degrees, desks. Dad had neither, but he had me. I always felt safe because his hands never let go, even when the world did. Tears glistened in every eye. Lucas knelt, arms open, and Eli ran into them, their embrace a beacon of unbreakable love. The applause was soft, reverent, unwilling to shatter the moment. Clara crouched beside Eli, her smile playful. Hey, Professor Varn, can I be your next student? Eli nodded solemnly. Only if you bring snacks. Their laughter, real, unguarded, filled the room like a melody. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and lights dimmed, Lucas and Clara stood by the studio's window, the skyline shimmering below. Do you regret not fighting harder back then? She asked. Lucas shook his head, his fingers slowly intertwining with hers. No, I'd have won the battle but lost what mattered. His voice softened. Now I teach people to speak, not to fight, but to believe they're worth hearing. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. You didn't just teach us language, Lucas. You taught us character. He smiled. And you reminded me I still had one. The janitor, the CEO, the child, 3 lives transformed by words, silence, and love. In the heart of New Avalon, where dignity had nearly been forgotten, the haven of voices glowed through the night. A lighthouse for the invisible, a home for voices that refused to fade, for hands that never stopped being honest, for hearts daring to heal. Sometimes the quietest voice reshapes the world, speaking when others fall silent. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a hope, a belief in kindness's power, share where you're reading from. Your voice matters here. If you believe in stories of healing, dignity, and second chances, join us for the next tale that might touch your soul. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Stay kind, stay strong, and keep believing in the quiet power of good.